Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are going to get started very shortly, just waiting for everyone to filter in. Just wanted to kick off the presentation with a few introductions. So my name is Mike Rick. I'm a senior admission officer at Brown University. I'm joined by several very wonderful colleagues across three other institutions. So running the chat and answering questions is Corey Milton of University of Maryland. We also have Shannon Gundy from the University of Maryland and Robert Ellis from Northwestern University. On top of that, I am joined by three wonderful panelists, and I'll have them introduce themselves now. So Brian, you can go right ahead.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Brian Drabek. I'm Senior Associate Director of Financial Aid at Northwestern University. I've been at Northwestern for about 20 years, so I know kind of the ins and outs of financial aid for Northwestern. I will pass it over to Melina.
Hi, my name is Melina Heng. I am an Associate Director of Office of Student Financial Aid at the University of Maryland. I've been in this field for 16 years. So we have a lot of experience with the process itself. I'm hoping that I will be able to provide you enough information to assist you in understanding the process.
And I'm Corey Splain. I'm with the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I'm the Director for Strategic Initiatives and Chief of Staff. And I formerly worked in financial aid for a little under 10 years. So just happy to have everyone with us today.
All right, with that being said, I did want to highlight the STARS College Network. And of course, you are all very familiar with it, having signed up for this webinar. But I encourage you to take a look at the website. There are a lot of great resources on there, including hopefully recordings of this session and the other sessions that are going on throughout this week, as well as links to all of our various partners, the 16 different schools that are involved in the STARS College Network, and other resources available too. So please take a look at the starscollegenetwork.org. Come back for more sessions later this week. We are encouraging everyone to come back because whoever attends these sessions the most, we're going to send some prizes out to. So we really appreciate everybody participating in our various sessions and whatnot. I did want to cover what we're going to be talking about this evening as well. So we're going to cover the cost of college, sticker price versus actual costs, the FAFSA or the free application for federal student aid, types of financial aid, questions which you should consider asking the various schools that you're looking at, as well as other different things to consider. Again, thank you all so much for joining. And Melina, I'll leave it up to you.
Thank you, Mike. So here we are, the start of the agenda here tonight is we're looking at the cost of attendance at different universities. As you can see here, the average estimated full-time undergraduate budgets, which provide you with by different sectors. You're looking at the comparison of a public 2 years in-district commuter, a public 4-year in-state on-campus costs, a public 4-year out-of-state on-campus cost, and then a private nonprofit 4 years on-campus cost. It is really important when you're looking at the cost of attendance or the cost of attending a college or a university. The cost of attendance is basically a college total estimated expenses for one academic year, which does include the tuition, fees, housing, food, books, supplies, transportation, loans, fees, and or miscellaneous expense. The cost of attendance is usually used to determine each student's aid eligibility. So here we're looking at the cost itself. You've noticed that the cost of the tuitions and fees, room and board make up majority of the cost of attendance. And that is typically what you want to focus on in terms of reviewing the cost of attendance and or getting a better understanding of what you should be expecting when you're looking at information to provide the different types of assistance. So when you're looking at the cost of attendance, what does it mean? The cost of attendance itself consists of two components. We have the direct cost. Typically, the direct cost will include the tuition, fees, housing, and food if the student is living on campus. And then indirect costs are costs that are not going to be charged to the student's account. That is transportation, books, supplies, which will be billed separately, not to the student's account. And it is most important when you're looking at the cost to really understand the sticker price and the actual cost. As you can see here, The sticker price itself is the annual published cost of attendance, but that's not what most family pay because it includes the tuition, fees, housing, food, as well as the supplies and transportation, which is what is not going to be charged to the student's account. When you're looking at the sticker price and trying to determine what you actually will have to pay, you would take the sticker price minus any gift aid that is free money where the students doesn't have to pay back the funds, include grants and scholarships. And then you want to take the next step in looking at self-help, that is federal loans that are paid back. So basically, if you are offered the federal loans, the students will have to repay the funds. And also consider work study as well too, even though the students will actually not see the costs come off of the bill itself, but that is cost that the students will be offered if they indicate on their FAFSA application that they are interested. So again, you take the sticker price minus any aid offered that the students receive, including self-help such as loans, and then you'll get the actual cost. The actual cost is what most family pay, and it's typically and oftentimes less than the sticker price because as we know it, the sticker price does include miscellaneous expense, transportation, personal expense, which are not charged to the student's account. So it is really important when you are comparing the cost of different colleges to look at the actual cost and not the sticker price. So what do you have to do when you're thinking about, I am interested in getting financial aid? What is the first step? The first step is to make sure that you complete the free application for federal student aid, which is also known as the FAFSA application. The FAFSA is always free. It is really important to understand that you do not have to pay to complete the application. There are a lot of organizations out there that will actually help you complete the FAFSA, but they will charge you a certain amount of money to complete it. It is very easy. The process will take you about less than 20 minutes, especially with the new process, streamlined process where the students will have the opportunity to answer questions and then they have skip logic. So it is really important that you complete the FAFSA by yourself or with your parents. The FAFSA will take you and your family income and personal information and calculate what is called a student aid index or SAI. The EFC, typically the estimated family contribution, you will notice that if you are in college this year, you will see that it is known as expected family contribution. But moving forward, starting the 24-25, the EFC will be transformed into student aid index. The student aid index itself is used to determine what aid the students are eligible for. So it is important that you understand that process, complete the FAFSA, and then you will be given what is called the student aid index. To complete the FAFSA, both you and your parents will have to establish the FSA ID. It is very critical that you do not share the password with anyone, that you have your own password and your parents have your own password, and it is secure. Some school may also have supplemental application that you also must complete. So be sure to reach out to the financial aid office to determine what else you may need to complete. It is important. Some school may use the CSS profile. Most institutions will not require the CSS profile, especially if they're a public institution. But once again, it is important that you pay close attention to the different types of application that is required to be considered for any need-based aid or even scholarships, making sure that you meet the admission priority deadline or early action deadline. So it is important that you keep that date in mind. So exactly what happened when you were looking at the FAFSA application? So from tax form to the FAFSA, how does it happen, right? So we're looking at the first step is making sure that you log into your current FAFSA or even start a new FAFSA by going to FAFSA.gov. You can also go through the website and apply for the FAFSA application through studentaid.gov as well too. In the findings section of the FAFSA, you will see a link to IRS button if you are eligible to use the IRS data retrieval tools. It is critical that if you are eligible to use the IRS data retrieval tools, you do take that step, because this step will eliminate a lot of the verification process. Your file may not be selected for verification if you automatically pull in the information through the data retrieval tool. Third, you want to click the link to the IRS button and log into the IRS site to retrieve your tax return information. Fourth, you want to review your tax return information and see the tax data that will be transferred into the FAFSA. It is important that you look at the line items to make sure that the information is correct and it is corresponding to your tax information. Then the next step is click the transfer my tax information into the FAFSA box, and then click the transfer now button. 6, review your federal tax information that has been transferred into the data fields on the FAFSA form. It is critical, once again, to always make sure when you transfer the information that it is matching your actual tax return. And then after you complete all that process, of course, this is just the tax return section of the FAFSA. There are other information that you will have to report, such as the school code. With the upcoming 2024-25 FAFSA application, you will be allowed to enter more school code than the 10 school that you currently are able to do. So it is going to be a lot different, and the FAFSA application will also have less question. But once you complete all of the information, you will then submit your FAFSA application. And it is important to make sure that you receive the process, that your FAFSA has been processed email to be sure that it actually have gone through. Because sometimes what ends up happening is that students may complete the FAFSA application and then they never submit the information, but they thought that they did. So it is always important to make sure that you actually receive the email that state that your FAFSA has been processed. When you're looking at the FAFSA timeline, what do I need to do, right? That is a really good question. The FAFSA application will always be available October 1st of each year. But with an exception, with the 2024-25 FAFSA, due to the FAFSA Simplification Act changes, the FAFSA will not be available until December. So for those of you who are applying to colleges for the fall of 24, your FAFSA application will not be available until December, so at the end of the year. You want to make sure to keep an eye out for when the FAFSA is released. We don't have the date yet, but it is important that you understand that it will be available in December, and it is always best to complete the FAFSA application as soon as it's available. And why do you think this is the reason? It's because if you complete the FAFSA application by the institutional deadline, you will be considered for institutional funding, and that is really critical. Oftentimes, you may receive federal funding, you may receive state funding, but it's usually institutional funding that you can be offered to assist you in lowering the cost and then also lowering the gap itself, the tuition and fees that you have to pay. The next section, when you complete the FAFSA application, what are you looking at? What types of aid are you really applying for? So we're looking at 3 different types of funds. We have 1, free money, which is grants and scholarships. 2, we have borrowed money, which is also considered as self-help. So that is come in the form of federal loans through the federal government by completing the FAFSA application. And 3, work study earned money. You have to actually earn the funds as we go. With this information, I'm going to transition over to my colleague, Brian. He will go into details in terms of what you're looking at when you're looking at this 3 types of financial aid.
Thank you, Melina. So one of the main components when you receive a financial aid notice from an institution, you may receive information regarding some need-based grant assistance or scholarship assistance from either federal resources or institutional resources or state resources. So for example, in this image, you see there are things referred to as the federal Pell Grant, a supplemental educational grant, Iraq and Afghanistan service grant, and a TEACH grant. So those are the main federal grant programs that are available to students. Those are need-based grant assistance. Beyond that, as I mentioned, there may be need-based state grants available to you, or perhaps an institution may also offer a need-based grant or merit-based grant as well. So it really will depend on a case-by-case basis. But what's important to understand is these are resources that will help finance your education, and these are funds that are an investment in you and your education, so they do not have to be repaid in any way to the school or to any other entity. So this is free money for you to receive as an investment in your education and your future. So these are the most desirable forms of assistance, as you'll see in your aid notice. So the next type of assistance that might be made available to you are loans. There's a variety of different loans that are actually available. Here we're going to focus on federal loans that are available. The first one that you might receive is something called a subsidized direct loan. And what subsidized means is that it is subsidized by the government, in that the Department of Education is paying the interest on the loan while you're enrolled at least half time. So that means you have an interest-free loan while you are enrolled. So for the duration of your education and until about 6 months after you finish your program and you're no longer enrolled, that loan is interest-free. So if you borrow, for example, $3,500 your first year, by the time you graduate, your loan balance is still going to be $3,500. Different from that is something called a direct unsubsidized loan. So that is also a federal loan, but it does collect interest upon disbursement. So the loan is going to capitalize interest while you're enrolled as a student. So your balance is going to be higher than what you initially borrowed. So this loan and the subsidized loan, once you enter repayment, are going to collect interest. So the interest will be determined at the time that you're borrowing the loan. So you'll need to do some investigating to determine what your rate is going to be. There also may be origination fees at play depending on when you borrow. So that is another consideration that you need to be mindful of as well. Beyond that, there is what we consider sort of a financing option, which is a direct plus loan. And for undergraduate students, the plus in the title is an acronym for Parent Loan for Undergraduate Students. And so that effectively is an option for students to work with their parents in finding a funding option for their education. So that it's a credit-based loan in that a parent will have to authorize a credit pull. So their credit will have to be determined to see if they're eligible to borrow from the program. And you can borrow up to the full cost of attendance minus any other assistance that you're receiving. Again, you'll have to consider origination fees, interest rates, and repayment options. So some students and their parents opt to defer payments until after graduation, or some will make payments while the student is enrolled. There's also something called the Federal Perkins Loan, which currently is not an active loan program, so we won't get too much into detail on that, but it is a need-based loan program. Beyond that, you will find that there are other options out there. Private loans, for example, private educational loans, you'll get a lot of offers regarding those. There are some schools that offer institutional loans as well. One of the things that we always advise students is to really consider exhausting their federal student loan options first, because those typically have the better options for students, better repayment options. There are a lot of repayment benefits available to students in repayment. For example, if you end up working in certain fields, there may be loan forgiveness available and things of that sort. So it's really important that you do your research when you're considering different loan options. And that's where your financial aid counselors are going to really be a great resource for you to help you make sure you're making the right choice. So be sure to call your financial aid office as you're working through your options. So federal work study. Federal work study is a federal aid program available to students. It's a need-based program, as Melina mentioned, that your eligibility is determined through completion of that FAFSA. And so federal work study is a really popular program on our campus because it allows students the opportunity to work part-time on campus while they're completing their studies. Research has actually shown that students who work at least part-time actually perform academically better than students who do not. So it's those students that are worried about the obligation of working while studying that might help relieve some of your stress as you consider what options are available. The way that the funding works for the federal work study program is that the government pays a portion of your salary and the institution pays another portion. So for example, at Northwestern, the government will pay 70% of your wages in most cases, and the university pays 30. So it's a federally subsidized program. So that's why resources are limited through the program, making it need-based. So as you're working with schools, you'll find that a lot of them will have limited resources for these programs. So if you don't see a federal work study offered on your initial aid notice, you might consult with the institution to see if that might be something available to you either later in the year or in future years. So beyond what's offered on your initial aid notice from the institution, there's also a lot of different resources available just outside of the federal aid programs and even outside of your institutions. So it's really important as you're looking for resources to finance your education that you take a really good look at different outside scholarships that are out there. Some are need-based, like you have through the FAFSA. Some are merit-based. Some are based on your affiliation. So perhaps if you're part of an organization or if your parent's employer offers a scholarship. For example, if your parent works for Coca-Cola, they might have a scholarship available. Or if your parent is part of the VFW, they might have a scholarship that is available as well. So it's really important for you to exhaust all of your options. There are different no cost options out there. I think scholarships.net, FastWeb. Just be very careful that you're not paying anything. Just like with the FAFSA, you really shouldn't be paying to apply for any scholarships. So if you ever have any questions regarding the veracity of an application, or when they're asking for financial information, make sure that you're checking with your financial aid office just to make sure that it's legitimate. But there's a lot of resources available out there for you to explore. So next we want to talk about things that you might want to consider asking your school as you're evaluating your financial aid options. As Melina mentioned, there are some schools, for example, that require the CSS profile. Northwestern is one of those. Beyond that, some institutions may also require parent tax documents. So it's important for you to ensure that, yes, you do the FAFSA, but to check with the school to make sure that other applications aren't required, because you don't want to be in a position where you've been admitted and then you suddenly realize you're not receiving a financial aid notice because there are other materials required and you've missed a deadline or something like that. So be sure to check with that. And One of the other things too is you want to make sure that you have a really comprehensive experience and you want to get the most out of your education. So you want to explore options like summer financial aid or study abroad. These are things that really help make a well-rounded experience for students. And so you want to ensure that before you commit to that school, that they help support some of those opportunities. So for example, do they help with study abroad programs? Because in some cases that might cost more than regular on-campus study. So look into what that costs, how the school supports you, and what kind of resources are available. Is it strictly loans? Do they offer scholarships? Do they offer grants? That sort of thing. And one of the last things that we'll suggest to you is probably one of the most important is if you are receiving outside scholarships, you really want to make sure you understand your school's financial aid policy regarding how they adjust for outside scholarships. So for example, some schools might use it to reduce an institutional grant that you're receiving. Other schools might say, we'll use your outside scholarship to reduce your subsidized loan or your work study. So you want to make sure that you have all the information from the get-go. It's important not to make assumptions. And that's really going to help you compare schools when you have different financial aid letters. If you're bringing other resources to the table, you want to make sure that you can maximize the benefit of all of those resources. And I can't stress enough how we want to hear from you. So be sure that you reach out to your financial aid offices. That's what we're here for. So reach out to us anytime at any point in the year to ask us any questions. We want to be a good resource to you, and we want to make sure that you're making an educated decision. So if you need to contact us more than once, we're happy to help you. The other thing that I would add is that you should consider if your family's financial circumstances change at any point, make sure that you're communicating that to your school. The way that the FAFSA is designed is it's actually looking at tax data from a couple years back. So for example, this year, as we're preparing for, I should say, 23-24, we're looking at 2021 tax data. So things may have changed in your family's financial situation of what you're reporting on the FAFSA. So if that's the case, make sure you're talking to your school and asking them if that's something they can consider if your circumstances have changed. So other things that you might want to evaluate with your school is asking what are their housing requirements. So for example, at Northwestern, we have a 2-year housing requirement, and we also require the comprehensive meal plan. Other schools may have other policies or requirements as well. So you want to make sure you're asking what exactly is going to be your commitment financially. Other things like winter housing or over spring break or over Thanksgiving break, you want to ask your school if you're traveling from a long distance, what housing options are available? Does that come at an added cost, or do they offer financial support for those circumstances? If you're coming from an environment where perhaps maybe you're coming from a warm environment and you're coming to Chicago where winters can be kind of rough, you might want to ask your school, is any kind of support offered to get winter clothing? So winter gear like gloves, hats, and coats, things like that. Is there anything available in that regard? Also, I think you might want to ask your school, is there any emergency assistance available if something were to happen perhaps on campus that you needed medical attention and things like that, that might be a financial burden on you. One of the things we always see at our school is that students try to save their money when purchasing their books and supplies. So look into each institution's interlibrary loan program. Is there a way to borrow books without having to purchase them? So ask your schools about that. And if you're a DACA student or an undocumented student, find out what kind of financial aid is available to students with your status. You'll find these days that a lot of schools do offer additional support. The application requirements will likely be different since those students typically are unable to complete some of the application materials. So you might have special documentation you'll need to provide. So be sure to look into that. Research the websites, call and speak to a financial aid counselor. And if you have special circumstances that we haven't mentioned here today, be sure to mention those as you work with your school as well. So it looks like we have some good questions.
Yeah, I can start sharing some of those, and you and Melina can answer them. So it looks like we have some questions about the student aid index. Specifically, how is the student aid index affected if you have a twin, and what happens with the student aid index if your parent owns a small business with varying income year to year? Melina, did you want to answer the one about
Yeah, so in terms of the student aid index, it's going to be changing for starting the 24-25 academic year. And I think this is the reason why we need to start discussing and also start sharing the information. So the new analysis formula does remove the number of family members in college from the calculation. I think I also typed it on there also. It does allow a minimum SAI of negative 1,500. So that is a big change in terms of how the need analysis is going to be for starting the 24. I know that oftentimes we are looking at the expected family contribution, for example, for this year, and the number in college does impact the EFC. So when you have two, it's split in half. Starting at 24-25, that calculation will be updated, and the number in college will not impact the student aid index.
Brian, do you think? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Corey.
I was going to say, Brian, do you think you could address the owning a business with varying income from year to year?
Sure. Yeah. So that kind of touches upon what I was speaking to a little bit a few minutes ago regarding changes in your family's financial circumstances. So what's important to understand is that you're completing the FAFSA application each year. So it's not something you're just completing your first year and then that your award is or your aid is locked in, but we're actually evaluating it year to year. So what's important for you to do in those cases is if your family's income fluctuates, you'll want to work with your financial aid office to make sure they understand. For example, if your 2022 income is vastly, dramatically different than 2021, you'll want to ask your school if you can submit special circumstance information to have your aid eligibility reevaluated. The other thing to consider, though, is obviously before you want to commit to a school, you want to have an understanding of, well, if I know that my parents might have a good year one year or a bad the next, you might want to work with the financial aid office to determine what would an estimate look like if my parents were to earn $50,000 more this one year versus the next. So that will allow you to make a better educated decision before you make any commitments.
Thanks, Brian. Looks like the next question that we'll take is about scholarships. Is it normal for when applying for scholarships that they ask for your address? Melina.
Absolutely. The reason why that they may ask for your address is because they need to notify the students. Oftentimes you have to update the information, your address, your email address, but always make sure that you do look to the terms and condition, read it carefully. If you're also not sure in terms of if the scholarship is valid or not, you can always reach out to a university or colleges, and they can actually confirm and assist you through that process. Oftentimes, we don't have a particular counselor or an area where we focus on private scholarships, but because we are in this field and we may know more information about the different types of scholarships that's valid or not, it is always best to ask a counselor or reach out to, a university. We will be able to kind of help you through that process. And if you don't, we'll let you know we're not so sure. You may need to reach out or do some research to make sure that it's valid and not spam. But yes, it is practical for them to ask you for your address, because they have to notify you if you are going to win the scholarship or receive the scholarship.
Thanks, Melina. The next one we have is, what can I do as a high school freshman to aid in the financial aid process for college? Brian.
It's a great question. There's a couple of things that I would suggest. One is something we actually haven't discussed yet, and that is called the net price calculator. So each school that administers financial aid programs is required to offer something called a net price calculator on their website. And so what that is it effectively is an available option for you to receive an estimate of what your financial aid eligibility might look like at that school. So I think that's really going to be tremendously helpful to you in doing your research and trying to determine what cost is going to look like at these different schools. And it's never too early to start doing that sort of thing. But beyond that, what I would suggest is, yes, I think you're mentioning about, getting a job and that sort of thing. Start saving now if you can. Of course, that would be tremendously helpful as well. To start putting money away to help, and there's no better investment than your own education, right? The other thing that I would say is to start researching outside scholarships as soon as you can. There is such a small window of time to apply for these outside scholarships that once it comes time for you to start applying, the time is going to fly by. So what I would suggest is maybe creating a spreadsheet of scholarships that you find that you might be eligible for, and marking down, their contact information, their websites, and their deadlines. And from time to time, check on those deadlines to see if anything is changing, so that when you're finally in a position to apply, you have everything and you're pretty much ready to go. So that's really going to help you out. And I think you're going to find that a lot of outside scholarships are available to first year students. So that first year is really an important time to apply for those.
Thanks, Brian. Next we have, is applying for the FAFSA primarily a requirement for seniors, or are high school juniors allowed? Basically, when should we apply for the first time? Melina.
So as an incoming student, you would start completing the FAFSA application or any type of financial aid application starting your senior year, when you actually are planning on applying for college the next fall semester. There are cases where students are enrolled in dual courses, and some university you can use financial aid for that, as long as the dual is counted as a degree seeking. So as long as it's degree seeking, you may also apply. But typically, in most cases, 99%, you start applying your senior year. If you are curious though, with the new FAFSA changes for the 24-25, you can actually use the formula. Soon they'll share that information, and it would actually, with the new formula, it helps you to determine what type of aid you'll be receiving. And that is the reason why the process itself is changing, because they want students to start thinking about affordability. How can I apply for additional scholarships early on? With the new student aid index, the students will be able to say, here's my family income, what will I qualify for? And you can determine immediately if you're Pell eligible students and what aid you should be expecting. So that is something that you can always play with. If you go to the studentsaid.gov website, you can enter your information, and then they will provide you with the EFC or student aid index, and then you can start planning out where you want to go, what you're looking at, and looking at the affordability.
Thanks, Melina. The next one we have is, do you have any recommendations like websites for researching scholarships? Brian.
The two that come to mind to me are fastweb.com and scholarships.net. Those are both nonprofit organizations that do a really good job of putting together a comprehensive website that collects a lot of outside scholarships into one resource. So I think you start by basically providing some very basic demographic information about yourself. And then it tries to connect you based on your information and your interests in different applications or resources that are available. So those are the top two that I would say are a great starting point.
Thanks, Brian. The next one we'll do is, can you speak to stacking scholarships? What does stacking typically mean? Melina.
Absolutely. When you're talking about stacking scholarships, it's really important to understand that if a student is being offered a Pell Grant, for example, and they receive institutional need-based aid for our university, University of Maryland grant, you can actually stagger that scholarship along with any merit aid scholarships that you're offered, such as the Dean Scholarship or any state awards. You can stagger the scholarships up to the cost of attendance. So that is basically what staggering means. You can receive more than one scholarships, combine it to assist you in lowering the cost of the actual cost of the attendance.
Thanks, Melina. There's also a question in here about being able to access the recording of this meeting. We do think that this will be posted to the Stars College Network website. We're not certain when, but we'll find out that information and see how we can get it out to folks. But it should be added to the website, the Stars College Network website. Let's see here. The next question that we're going to do is, do scholarships impact your financial aid from colleges? Melina.
Scholarships can impact the financial aid the students being offered, especially impacting the need-based aid financial aid that the students may receive from the institution itself. But when you're looking at, when we're talking about staggering scholarship and also receiving more scholarships, typically the students can receive any type of scholarship up to the cost of attendance. If the student is over need, we will, as an institution across the nation, will remove students' loan first before we even touched or reduced any of the scholarships that they are receiving. But typically the students can receive scholarships up to their cost of attendance.
Thanks, Melina. The next question we're going to take is about international students. Is there any other financial aid information international students will be take of, and can international students be eligible for the FAFSA? Brian, can you take that one?
Sure. So in order to be eligible for any Title IV federal student aid, you need to be either a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen. So unfortunately, as an international student, you would not be eligible to complete the FAFSA unless you are one of those two statuses. But my advice, what's very important, is to really understand from the institution what types of financial resources are available to international students. So some institutions will have a special admissions process by which an international student can indicate on their admissions application that they would like to apply for financial aid, but that puts them in a more selective pool because resources may be limited at the institution for how many students they can fund with need-based assistance. So it's important that you know going into it that you might have to apply through a special pool, or you might have to make that indicator on your initial application. Sometimes students will apply as an international student, receive their admissions notification, and then say, I need to apply for financial aid. And at that point, it might be too late. So it's important for you to contact the schools you're interested in and determining exactly what's available and how you apply for that.
Thanks, Brian. The next question is, if my first year of college is going to be fall 2025, when do you recommend I start applying for scholarships? Melina.
So when you're looking at applying for scholarships, even if you cannot apply yet because you are not in the time frame of applying, I would always recommend students starting as early as their ninth grade freshmen in high school to start searching for scholarships, because majority of the funds that you receive in scholarship money is actually what is going to fill in the gap or lower in your cost. Federal aid, state funding, even in most cases, because merit aid scholarships through the institution is very competitive, the students will most likely not receive sufficient financial aid to cover everything. So they need to start as early as freshmen. You can start an Excel spreadsheet, compile the information, and also, especially when you're looking at applying for scholarship, you want to look at the profile of prior recipient. What are they? What is their profile? How did they end up with this particular scholarship? And if you didn't fulfill part of the requirement, what you can start doing is fulfill them, start an organization, start a club, start something so that you can actually be more of a competitive recipient for any type of scholarship. But I always recommend that you start early and then start compiling the scholarship information. So that way, once you are ready to apply and it's time for you to apply, you can start submitting the application. One of the other note is also your college application, the essay that you wrote, you can actually improvise it and then use that college application to apply for scholarships. And that way you can apply to as many scholarships as possible and not limit yourself to just one. You can use one scholarship application to apply for, or your essay for admission to apply for, 20 scholarship, but just make sure that you change the institution or, change the content of what, if you're applying for Burger King scholarships, make sure you change that you're applying for Burger King and not University of Maryland scholarship or whatnot. But that is really important. And starting early, it's never too early to start looking for it. Any local restaurants that you may go eat at, they may even have scholarships. You may also want to start talking to your employer. They may also, your parents' employer may also support students with their tuitions.
Thanks, Melina. We also wanted to share, there's a question in the chat that asked about STAR program's participation on covering student tuition for families with incomes under 120,000. And it also asked about if a parent who works as a middle school principal in a rural area, is their scholarship funded by the government through that position. For that first part, you'd want to talk to the specific STAR school about any scholarships or tuition programs that they may have. There isn't one for all of STAR schools. It's different from school to school. As for the middle school principal scholarship, I don't know one that's specifically funded through the government, but that would be another one, just like Melina shared, that you might want to try and look for to see if such a scholarship would exist. Another question that I want to address that I'm not going to give to Brian or Melina, there's a question in here that says, with the EFC student aid index not taking other siblings in college into consideration next year, does this mean that my EFC will be higher? Unfortunately, we don't really know yet. Because the student aid index is completely new and we don't even have access on completely how to figure out what it would be. It is possible it could be higher next year, but we just don't know since we're still going through the FAFSA simplification process. So I wish we had an answer to that, but there's no way for us to know just quite yet. So I'll go to the next most upvoted question, which is, if a student does not ask for any financial aid, are they more likely to get into the university? In other words, is a full paying student more likely to be accepted?
So the financial aid process itself and the admission to the university is two separate processes. The admission team does not have access to any of the FAFSA information. We use the FAFSA application to see if the students qualify for any institutional funding. So again, the financial aid process does have nothing to do with the admission process. It's two separate processes. Let me see, the second portion of the question is, in other words, is a full paying students more likely to be, It has nothing to do with each other. The admission process is solely based on your academic, your GPA, your extracurricular activity. There's, for at least for University of Maryland, we review it on a basis of 25 different criteria that we use to determine whether students would be accepted into university or not. And I think, Brian, I don't know how you guys review your process, admission process, but I'm pretty sure it's the same thing. We don't use the FAFSA application to determine whether you would be accepted into a university or not.
That's right. Yep. I think it's true for most schools. Yeah.
Yeah, the only time that you would want to be wary of that is if a school is not need blind. So that would be a question that you could potentially ask a university, is whether or not they're a need blind institution. And if they say they aren't need blind, then they may be considering what you put on the FAFSA. But I think the vast majority of us in the STARS College Network are need blind, if not all. All right. I think the next question we'll take is, does being a first generation student play a role in financial aid? I think both of you could potentially give your answers for this, because they might be different.
I can start. A lot of what we're talking about today is need-based financial aid. So because of that, really being a first-generation student in and of itself isn't necessarily going to establish any additional aid eligibility for you. There may be at an institution, perhaps like an endowed scholarship that is explicitly donated to the university to be administered to first generation students. But still that would be awarded on the basis of financial need.
So Brian answered really well. The need-based component of any financial aid offer is really based on the FAFSA, solely based on the FAFSA application, and or of course, if you're going to a private institution, they may use another type of application process, but that has nothing to do with the need-based component. We use the FAFSA application to determine what your financial need is and offer the aid based on your financial need.
Thank you both. We're going to do one last question. It's the question of, how often do we have to complete the FAFSA after the first time during senior year? If my single parent starts making more, does that mean they will reduce my financial aid accordingly? Melina, you want to take that one?
So the FAFSA application, students have to complete the application annually. To qualify for financial aid every single October, the FAFSA will be available. Students must recomplete the FAFSA application because the aid evaluation is based on 2 years prior information. And I think Brian mentioned previously, if your family is going through any circumstances that has a change in their income, we can always reevaluate. So it is important to recognize that most institutions will require the FAFSA application every single year. You have to complete that.
Thanks so much, Melina. We'll toss it back to Mike, who will get us wrapped up for this evening.
Thank you very much, Corey, and thank you to Brian and Melina for sharing all your expertise on financial aid. Again, thank you all very much for joining us here virtually to learn a little bit more financial aid and the STARS College Network. Please reach out if you do have any questions, either directly to our financial aid offices or to the STARS College Network inquiry page. We are happy to try to follow up with any questions that were submitted in the chat that we weren't able to get to today. We have a transcript of things, so we'll try to reach back out to you by the end of this week. But if you haven't heard from us and you want an answer to your question, please just pick up the phone and call our offices. That's really the best way to get a hold of us. I will also say, join again tomorrow night as well as Thursday night. We're going to have a college student panel tomorrow and then a case study of an application on Thursday. So I'm hopeful that we'll get a lot of participants and a lot more questions. But with that being said, thank you all so much. Take care. Have a nice evening. And we're going to sign off now.